Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the next of our sessions at the Longevity Leaders Conference. Really looking forward to today's panel and to hosting you all here. So before I hand over to our moderator, I'd like to remind you to please get involved, ask plenty of questions, use the chat. This is a live session, so we really want to make sure that you're all corresponding and getting involved. But before I hand over to Azka Ali, our chairman for today, I'd like to welcome you all to today's panel on addressing the gender pension gap. Over to you, Azka.
Thank you, Angela. Thanks for the introduction. So my name is Azka Ali. I work as an actuary at Mercer, and I will be your chair today for the gender pension gap session. And we have until 3:50 p.m. We will try to leave a few minutes for Q&A in the end, but if you do have questions as and when they come up, please do share them on chat. So I'll come back to the introductions in a moment, but let me just explain what the gender pension gap is so you understand the significance of our panel here today. So what is the gender pension gap? It is the difference in pension outcome for female pensioners compared to male pensioners. And very recently, a trade union called Prospect published research that shows the average female pensioner is £7,000 per annum poorer than her male equivalent. And that's per annum. So maybe over their pension lifetime, it could be 150 or 200,000 pound pot, which is a very, very big sum of money. And that, along with women living longer, doesn't leave them in very good financial health. And why is there a gap? So there are a couple of reasons, some key reasons, and then a lot of nuanced reasons, and you'll see this as we talk to the panel. But A, it comes from the gender pay gap. So if your salary was lower, your pension contributions are likely to be lower as well. So you accrue less pension over your working lifetime. Also, over the last few decades, you would have seen this endlessly in the news, especially in the UK. There have been unequal pension entitlements between men and women that have added to this gap as well. And also, very naturally, we take time out of the labour market to care for children and family members as well. And if you don't fall in that bucket, you don't realize how common that is. So 1 in 7 women in their early 40s are caring for both children and an elderly relative. And even if you're not taking time out, 47% of women actually work part-time and only 30% of men do that. So you can see quickly how these differences accumulate. But our panel today understands these issues really well, so let me introduce them. Clare Reilly is the Chief Engagement Officer at PensionBee, which is a female-founded pension provider. She focuses on connecting customer engagement and responsible investment to drive better outcomes for savers, for pension savers in particular. And Clare's background is in the charity sector. Dr. Sobel has founded FinTech for Longevity, so she has a focus on FinTech to improve financial health. She's been working on a working group for the World Economic Forum called Redefining Retirement. And her PhD actually also looked at retirement, health, and economic outcomes of households within lots of different pensions and healthcare systems. And she has been a non-executive director of Bank of Jerusalem and has an accountancy background, having worked at KPMG. Julia Randell-Khan is a consulting fellow on the New Map of Life program at Stanford University's Center of Longevity. She's also a senior fellow at encore.org and also a CEO of Encore Fellows UK. Both of these organizations focus on Encore career movement. And as a lawyer, Julia has spent 25 years in the legal field between Norton Rose Fulbright and Freshfields. And she's also set up Women in Transition program, which helps women transition from long-term careers to the next phase of their life. So Clare, I'm going to start off with you, please, if you don't mind. I guess to start off, what I would like to understand is, as a pension provider focused on the mass market, especially one that's female founded, what story and anecdotes do you hear, and what does the data tell you?
Yeah, hi to everyone. Thanks for having me. So I'll just give a kind of 2-second overview of what who PensionBee are and what we're trying to solve. So we're an online pension provider, and we exist to make the experience of saving in the UK easier, more enjoyable, and more engaging, with ultimately the goal of happier retirements for everyone. And we exist for everyone. So from if you're 18 to 80 and any pot size at all, so we've got no minimums, and we help people bring together all of their old pensions, often from old jobs, into one new plan. And that's a problem that's prevalent in the UK, because every time you start a new job in the UK, you get a new pot. We did our first transfer back in 2016, and we now have over 1.5 billion in assets under administration, and we were actually very proud to list on the London Stock Exchange last month, so we're also a public company. But our mission is to make pensions simple, and so because we're focused on everyone, the vision we have really is to change the pensions ecosystem for all savers in the UK. And as part of that, we challenge some of the chronic unfairness that we see impacting our own customers, indeed all savers. So as you mentioned, we're a female-founded pension provider, and we have complete gender parity across every level of our business, and we've been looking at the gender pensions gap since our inception. We've done that in a few different ways, but we spent a lot of time trying to understand why the pay gap compounds into the gender pension gap. And so we've looked firstly at all of our own data, and the data that we have on female pot sizes matches all of the mainstream data that we see, and that's overall that females have, they retire in the UK with, around 40% smaller pots than those belonging to men. And also, as we see, those problems compound over time. So when women, and particularly our customers, reach their 50s, we see that their pots are half the size of men's. Of course, we know many factors contribute to that, as Azka has mentioned. But as part of the work on the issue, what we did as well was we've started to do a bit of a deep dive into the customer stories as well. So we've done a lot of interviewing of our female customers of all ages to try and understand more about their stories and their understanding and perception of why they have smaller pots and what's led to that. And so really, I think through talking to our customers, we've really kind of to understand, that they're working the same number of hours as men. They're not working any fewer hours. They're simply being paid. Men are simply being paid for all of those hours and more. And so I think what we really need to do, and what's become really clear from talking to our customers, is that we really need to change the framework for the way that we look at this and the way we talk about the issue. And I'll give two really quick examples of why that is. And so in all the interviews that we've done, in nearly all women are coming up that we're speaking to when they speak about having a baby, is that no one is factoring in pension contributions into that spreadsheet of costs that couples put together when they're planning a baby. So, we all know, if you've made that spreadsheet, and I have, that people encourage you to put all sorts of random items on that spreadsheet, like nappy bins and baby wipe warmers, but no one's actually telling you that what should go at the top of that, what should go at the top of the spreadsheet is, and the most essential cost really is the pension contributions for when women are taking time out of the workplace. And that's not something that women are telling us that they ever thought about, or that's something that's happening. And they're not, and I think with childcare as well, the second example is when we speak to women and we talk about why there are gaps in their pension contributions and what led to them having smaller pots. What we hear time and time again is women saying that they, when they had a baby, they didn't go back to work because the cost of childcare was going to be equal or more than their salary. And it seems quite strange that women, when they talk about the childcare costs, even though obviously having a baby is a joint endeavour, they always seem to talk about the cost of childcare as something that they are the only stakeholder in. And I think we see that same view coming across again and again in interviews. And so something that we've really come to understand is that we need to change the way that we talk about this. And there seems to be endless literature out there for women on how they need to change what they're doing. So that's, buying less coffee or doing more with the less money that they have. And actually, I think what we need to stop doing is increasing the burden that we put on women to fix this problem. And I think that we need to actually push the issue back onto the people who financially benefit the most from this construct persisting, and that's men. And obviously they're the ones also setting the rules and the policy. So I think really for us, just to sort of conclude, that the story that our customer data is telling us backs up everything we're seeing in the mainstream, but the stories behind it are that the gender pay gap, as it currently exists, benefits men financially, and therefore they're the ones that need to help us make the space in professional lives and in personal lives, and they need to be allies in this in a way that I don't think that we're talking about at the moment. And I think that they have a responsibility in obviously as employers, as fathers, as parliamentarians and policymakers, to be creating home environments and work environments that set women up for success, offer flexible working, offer job shares, home working, on-site creches, and obviously they have the power to make that happen. So I think, just to summarize, the voices we hear from our own work show us that we need to have a kind of fundamental shift in the way that we talk about this debate and the way that we have a kind of shift in understanding of whose responsibility is for solving the problem. And I think that needs to be moved away from being focused on women and onto this sort of collective job that everyone has in society, particularly obviously those who are benefiting most from the status quo.
Claire, a lot of that rings so true for me. I went part-time recently, and I'm ashamed to admit that as someone who works in pensions, I didn't think about my pension outcome and what that means, and I need to direct more towards it. And that's someone who does pensions day in, day out. And many years ago when I started, I had 2 very young children earlier on in my career. And when I went back to work, I couldn't break even with childcare costs for 2 kids. So I stayed at home and passed a few more exams, because you get paid more for every actuarial exam. And when I could break even, I went back to work. So that's very true for me. And I feel like that, and that was about 15 years ago. And I think that's still not changed. That's still the position. That was really interesting. Thank you. Ira, I'm going to come on to you, please, because you have spent years looking at pension systems around the world, different healthcare systems, pension systems. You have a PhD on this. And what's your view on how well they cater for women, and to what extent they have added to this pensions gap? You're still on mute, Ira. You're still on mute. Sorry, I can't hear you.
Okay, now, sorry. Okay, so thank you for having me. And I want to address this problem. First of all, when we speak about the gender gap in pension, usually it is explained by the gender gap in income and the gender gap in the occupational life course of men and women. But I want to add 2 additional explanations. Number 1 is risk aversity, meaning that women, because when we move from a DB to a DC pension model, so the question of risk is more salient than when we speak about DBs. So I think that because women are more risk averse, and we see it more in the United States, so their pension when they're in late life is also smaller because of this explanation. And usually we tend to overlook this this reason, but I think it's also important to look at this one as well. Another issue is the clocking in and clocking out of women from the labor force. So women usually tend to enter the labor force before men, but not necessarily they clock out from the labor force after men do. And they have several reasons. So we have to look also at the end of the occupational journey, not only in the time of clocking in, but also what is the years, what are the accumulated, what are the total years that women are in the labor market. Another thing is that we see that in OECD countries that there is a convergence into equal retirement eligibility age. And usually it's 67. In Israel, it's the only country in the world that women retire at 62 and men retire at 67. So these are also questions that we have to ask ourselves. What are the reasons? Or is it really beneficial to women to work until they are 67? And another thing is that there is a question of unisex life tables. And I don't know, there are many countries still in the world that have unisex life tables. So when we calculate how much money women are eligible in retirement, so these tables, because of the higher life expectancy of women, is a little bit lower per every year in the end of life. So additionally, there are some compensatory mechanisms like there were in Germany, for example, for child credits. And this is a compensatory mechanism for women who had many years stayed at home and took care of their children. So what I'm saying is that we have to look really on the whole occupational life course of women, both entering the labor force, taking these breaks to take care of children, later on taking breaks to take care for parents or spouses, and then leaving the working force. Now, I think that the current pension systems all around the world are gender neutral. And this is, of course, if we look in another area, another domain, at the beginning, clinical trials were made both for men and women. And then we have gendered medicine because we understand that the women's body is different from men's body. So probably we have to take different approaches. So I think that pension systems have to be more gendered and take into account the occupational, marital, familial roles of women across their life course.
And Dira, I know you mentioned gender neutral, but I don't know if you've seen some of them that are actually geared towards men because they've been around for so long. They were designed for men, and even some of the communications might be for men. And you refer to risk aversity. Do you think a lot of that comes from how pension communications work, and in terms of what materials women read, that then leads them to be more risk averse?
I think that the burden of pension, we usually think that it's on the shoulder of the individual. But I think that we have, again, to work on, to think how policies can build or design new gender sensitive arrangements. So risk aversity is, of course, on the shoulders of the individual. But once policies will be less gender neutral, meaning we will have a more sensitive arrangements. So I think that the question of risk aversity will be not so important as we think it is at the moment in the process of privatization of pension.
And have you seen any good examples where that has progressed faster? I know you said Israel still has a pension age for retirement of 62 for women, but are there any other particular features you've come across in different pension systems, maybe not at a national level, but maybe at a more company type level that you think are going in the right direction?
I think that the approach that we see in corporates in the US towards phased retirement puts retirement in a more, because I really believe in late life employment, and we will speak probably more about technology and the role of technology in late life employment. But we see that there are differences by why women retire and compared to why men retire. So men, for example, on average, if they work longer, it's driven by education and by prestige. They really want to work longer because they can. But women work longer or even beyond the legislative age of retirement because of financial needs. So I think that we have very much to understand why men and women are extending their labor market participation.
And you touched on later life working, Julia, that I think plays really well into the work you're doing. And one of the key reasons we discussed has been the pay gap. I know you've been looking into career opportunities, past career equity. Could you share some of those insights from the work at Stanford University's Longevity Center?
No, exactly. Well, thank you. I mean, the pay gap, clearly is a driving factor that will impact on the gender pension gap. Adjusted pay gaps, are getting smaller, but when we look at the raw pay gap, it can often still be 20-30% different. So what I wanted to do was just to look at a couple of points based on some of the research that's been going on at Stanford and many other organizations, and in particular, actually, the really powerful data analytics work that's being done by the Mercer Workforce Sciences team by Hagen Albantian, which I think is really informative when we unpick exactly what is going on in the workforce in relation to the impact on women's careers. Because what I'm talking about here is two things. One is career equity,
And career equity, what I mean here is essentially it's about promotion. It's about having equal opportunities for career advancement. And then the second thing to look at is and what Claire has already touched on actually is about, you know, the different career paths, different career choices that women make. And so these understanding what's going on in relation to career equity and the impact of different choices that women are making, and how that then impacts the ability to earn different or higher salary levels, and then obviously how that then impacts the pension position. But in terms of career equity, what I'm looking at here is promotion. And if I can just draw on some of the research that has come through from the Mercer analytics work, because it really tells such a you know, huge story, that, you know, all else being equal, what the data shows that women are less like 30% less likely to be promoted than men. And this is even though women are getting higher performance ratings in their performance reviews. And then if we look at part-timers, you said, I think in your intro, Azka, that, you know, 40% of women work on a part-time basis. Part-timers are, again, 30% less likely than full-timers to be promoted. So it matters. It matters who your supervisor is. If your supervisor has, you know, a more prominent role, has positive ratings for them, that has a significant influence on your own promotion. And if we think about the compounding effect of that in terms of pay and equity generally, it has a huge impact. And I mean, there are things that organizations can do to actually dig into this data and actually inform, and we've seen this from some of the evidence-based stories. But if companies can track what's happening in relation to gender representation, for example, across promotion, across hiring, across turnover, it will actually show a very clear story in terms of what is going on. Looking at the success profile of employees that do well in your organization, what is it? What's in that formula that enables that particular type of employee to succeed? And that will help inform, I think, the diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda that organizations are now, you know, starting to focus on much more clearly. But the second point is in relation to, you know, the career choices and career paths that women are making. There was, I think, to tie in with International Women's Day just back in March, there was some really, again, research and interesting data coming out of particularly the Global Financial Literacy Centre in Georgetown with Anna Maria Lusardi, Fidelity, Scottish Widows, many organisations, you know, honing in on some of the particularly looking at the pandemic. And the pandemic tells such a story in relation to the impact on women's finances. You know, working mothers, 50% more likely than fathers to have lost their job during the pandemic or resigned due to care issues. So women's career choices are often based on, you know, the need to balance family life. And we've all sort of spoken about that. You spoke about that, Azka. I had a similar situation in terms of my own career legal progression, you know, deciding to take a sort of a lateral move rather than to be able to have more time and be able to sort of manage this balancing act. But it's what often is written about as, you know, the motherhood penalty, and sociologists, you know, looking at the impact that having children has on women's salaries, pensions, and then obviously career prospects. In fact, one of our Stanford professors, a labor economist, Myra Strober, has said that, you know, one of the big, you know, career deciding factors is who you choose as your spouse or your partner, in terms of, you know, the overall sort of impact on family income. But what I would say is, you know, career equity is arguably more important than pay equity. If we start looking at the ways that women are able to progress equally through their organizations, to give women the chance to accelerate their careers in different ways, being in the right roles, having the right reporting lines, being in the right part of the business to support that potential for higher earning. So I suggest that's coming from the research and from the particularly the data analytics work that we're seeing. And I think it's important to look at the pension position through that lens in terms of understanding the career progression that women have through their lifetime.
So it goes back to the HR, the business leaders who appoint the people managers, and in particular being very aware of working mothers and part-time women and who those people managers are, and therefore how that supervisor will affect probably your career path and your career equity.
Exactly that. And the role of boards to demand this data, asking the right questions is critical in terms of being able to unpick this and then implement informed ways for their own organizations of ways to address this.
30% is still quite shocking, isn't it? That's hit me. I wouldn't have guessed it's as high as that. 30%
Yes.
less likely to be promoted.
Yes.
Even as a full-time on equal
yes.
everything.
And that the data shows that for example, smaller teams, it's even higher percentage when we're looking at promotion of women from smaller teams, for example. It can be up to 60-70%. So again, your positioning within the organization can impact your career progression. So understand, and the data is there. Organizations can look at this and understand how the career progression is being made and how it can be supported through training, through communication, through more flexible regimes for people to be able to progress.
And when I started thinking about this initially, Julia, I was thinking, well, the current pension gap is a result of what's happened over the last 20, 30, 40 years. And should we not expect things to be different now, because we are tackling a lot of the issues like the pay gap that should be coming down? So maybe things sort themselves out. And I think I concluded that that's true to a certain extent, but actually there are a lot of issues that are not going away. So women are going to continue to have families. They are going to continue to care for the elderly. And I came across one stat that said, I think amongst divorced people, 71% of divorces did not even discuss pensions during the divorce proceedings. And that meant women were 5 billion out of pocket every year.
Exactly.
So,
I think we might be coming on to talk about some of the risks, but certainly divorce is one of the big risk areas. And I know Claire's been looking at this as well. But after your house, your home, the pension is the second biggest asset that needs to get looked at in terms of being able to have a fair settlement in relation to divorce proceedings. And there's still so much misunderstanding. The jargon fools people. In terms of how judges, practitioners can actually be able to make a fair pension sharing order, for example.
I had a friend who was talking about her lawyer friend going through divorce recently, who ended up with the house and the dogs. And my pension colleague went back and checked, said, what happened to pension? And she forgot to consider it. So she went back to the lawyers and said, what about pension?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the Pensions Advisory Service has now produced some, good practice guides. So, I think that it's an education exercise, but, raising the pension issue as part of a significant part of the divorce proceedings is critical.
So quite a few things still to work on. It's by no means the issue is not going to sort itself out. So coming to addressing the problem, Claire, and I guess there will be a lot of people on the call, either who are women who want to know what action should they be taking when we kind of wrap up the session, or even employers, and also the people in the pension industry, as we collectively have some responsibility. What else can businesses do to close the gap?
I guess I should probably start by talking about what we're doing at PensionBee before we start talking advising what everyone else should do. So, I mean, obviously we need to lead by example. So we have, as I said, complete gender parity across the business, and actually, in fact, we have more than 50% on the board, and we've committed to maintain that. We've signed the Women in Finance Charter, but I think there are some really important things we've done as a business to make sure that women are supported to come back into the workforce after they have a child. So we've got a completely transparent parental leave policy that's obviously online and available for people before they apply for a job here, and which is very important. And that's 6 months full pay for men and women who've adopted or had a child of their own. Then all parents get additional parental leave each year. So that's for appointments, inset days, sickness, all the stuff that seems to happen all the time as parents. And so there's that. And then there's obviously the flexible working. You can work anywhere in the country that you need to. And you can also sort of ask us to make any changes to your working situation, and we will of course consider them. Pay the London living wage to everyone, regardless of where they are in the UK, because we believe that obviously a fair wage is linked to the should be linked to the true cost of living. And unfortunately, only 43 companies in the FTSE 100 agree with us on that point. But so also we sort of aim to have a 0% pay gap. At the moment, we have, I think, an hourly median pay gap of 4% and a median bonus pay gap of 0%. And that's in line. So the internal target we have is 0% with a variance of plus or minus 5%. But we don't have 250 staff, so we do voluntary reporting on that. But obviously, not only are we a pension provider, we're an asset owner, and we're a steward for all of the assets that our customers own through their pensions. So going back to our mission, as long-term asset owners, we need to be using that money to build a fairer, more inclusive society for our customers and all savers to retire into. So we work very closely with the money managers. We don't manage the money ourselves, but we work with our money managers to make sure that we're voting, or we're asking them to vote against management teams in investee companies that don't have sufficient gender diversity on boards or on leadership teams, and companies that are not taking the necessary steps to address it. Likewise, we feel very strongly about businesses that continue to have these big gender pay gaps and bonus gaps. And, ironically, sometimes the pensions industry can be quite guilty of that. So we'll call that out as well. So I think really in terms of businesses, I think, businesses need to make public commitments with accountable targets to close pay gaps, transparent parental pay policies, flexible working. I mean, all the things that we know already. But I think, as well as women and as consumers, I think we all have a lot of power in terms of, our economic and our wallets and our feet. And, we can make active decisions to boycott or to not work with or support companies that have large pay gaps. And I think we should all be taking more interest in who are good corporate citizens and supporting those companies to make sure that they are playing the role that we need them to play in order to try and kind of build the society we want to be part of and to normalize that good behavior. So, so you can actively do that. But I think as well, the other point that we need to sort of talk about is just touch on is women of color and this intersection and dual discrimination that impacts, pay gaps and pension gaps. So, we need to give extra attention on how the gender and the ethnicity pay gap can impact each other as well. And I think I'll kind of end on what men can do as well, because I think sometimes we sometimes we need a kind of a guide to men and the moments in their lives as well that they should be thinking a bit more, because we talk so much about the times in a woman's life, but I think a guide for men and I think the key moments in a man's life when they understand the impact that they might be having. So that's by not taking equal parental leave. That's not, if we had another pandemic, let's hope not, taking an equal share of that homeschooling and the domestic load, making the pension contributions on that spreadsheet so that the person who is off caring for the child has the pension contributions in a divorce as well, so around relationships and having a really honest and perhaps difficult conversation with a partner around unpaid and paid labor in a relationship, and understanding that 50% of those pension contributions while your partner is off work belong to them if it comes to a divorce situation. So yeah, and I think, look, just in terms of what men can do, I think what we, I think parental leave is a really important factor here, and I think that men should be taking a more active role in childcare. And I think even though in the UK we've introduced shared parental leave, I think I read a stat that only 1% of eligible parents men are actually stepping forward and doing that. So I think that would be one big step forward for women in terms of that.
Linked to that, Claire, there's an excellent question on if they're benefiting financially from gender pay gap, how do they also benefit from closing the gap? And that's, which is a very tricky question.
No, I just think it's about, I think it's just about building more inclusive and diverse businesses. And I think ultimately, businesses that have more progressive and flexible workplaces are going to bring with them in the long term, more sustainable financial returns for those companies and for investors in those companies and employees of those companies and all the stakeholders in those companies. And so I think we all have a collective duty to build, more sustainable businesses, not only because it's the right thing to do, but also because I think there is an economic argument that we should be doing that.
Absolutely. And Julie, there's one question I think you're going to pick up in our, addressing a problem section, but there's a comment on women in general also living longer than men. So after nursing and caring for a partner who might regrettably pass, there's less funds for this and longer life.
Yes,
So,
that's right. I mean, one of my colleagues at Stanford, Jalu Streeter, has done some research recently in relation to widowhood, because women, will often, as we know, outlive men by up to five or so years. But the research that she's done is that widows will often suffer a substantial income loss in up to about 20% during their widowhood in comparison to a widower. And what's the reason for this? Well, often men's pensions are significantly higher, often double the size of women's, and often early decisions are made in relation to, for example, survivor benefits, and who's going to be actually benefiting from a pension when someone dies. So these are all decisions, and Ira touched on this in relation to financial literacy and how women can inform themselves in terms of what the options are as they may be potentially, sadly facing widowhood. So, and in fact, the research that my colleague actually has done actually shows that women catch up really fast in relation to this sort of gap in terms of understanding the financials, in terms of the prospect of widowhood. But often these decisions have been made much earlier in the relationship, which are irreversible, and then that has the impact. So again, going to the what can be done, as a society, in terms of understanding the financial planning issues much more carefully, but particularly in relation to engaging women on that through the right types of communication is really important.
like Claire said, it is having that conversation with your spouse, your partner, your husband, which sounds like it can be quite tough if you're not used to sharing that or having that. But linked to that point, there's another comment on medical reasons such as menopause. And our older women whose workplace, for example, don't understand what the women are going through, are they more likely to drop out or reduce their hours significantly?
Yeah. I mean, huge amount of lost hours. I mean, Ira, do you want to comment on that?
No, I think that the menopause is a very important remark. I think that we have to think probably out of the box and see what are the alternative mechanisms for women to accumulate wealth, and not only pension. And probably we put too much focus and responsibility on the employer, because here the employer plays a big role in accumulation for pension. And probably there might be some other alternatives, such as, for example, progressive contributions. So women will, for example, contribute more percentages or a higher proportion of their salary when they work in order to compensate for maternity leave. So if they are on maternity leave and they don't contribute anything, so when they are before they give birth in the first years after the university, for example, so probably it has the pension contribution have to be more accelerated. And then after they come back to the workforce, so they have to compensate also. So probably then accelerate the contributions. So this is only one alternative that we have to think of. And another issue is not only about menopause, because as I saw, for example, from my research, that women are more sensitive, economically sensitive to health transitions. And menopause is, of course, a situation of changing health. So the economic sensitivity of women that become ill is much higher than men's. And this is because women over time suffer more from chronic diseases. They have also a longer life expectancy. And that's why the cost of healthcare of women is a little bit higher than that of men. So I think that probably if we speak about out of the box, how do we connect between pensions and medical insurance? How do we connect between pensions and insurance against depletion of wealth when women become ill? So I think that menopause is a very important problem that is usually not addressed, not by the employers and not by policymakers, but this is exactly a situation where women can really both suffer from not only from health problem, but also with some challenges in the labor market, because today employers are not at all aware of the challenges of menopause. So I think we have to see what are the alternatives. The last thing I want to address is the differences within the group of women. Now, you spoke about widowees, but I think that widowed women are better off than their divorced and single counterparts, because usually widows are the remainders of some accumulation of pension also that belonged to their husbands. But in my research, I saw that the biggest pension gaps, or gaps in accumulation of wealth, are between divorced men and divorced women. And the thing is that divorce is a very severe downward social mobility transition, especially for women. So probably policy has to make changes for divorced women before they help the widow. Not that I have something against the widow women, but I think that marital status, because marriage is a very important shield against depletion of wealth over time. So married women are better off than their divorced and single counterparts. So I think that we have also to look at this differentiation, how these transitions affect women's wealth over time, not only compared to men in the same marital situation, but also comparing to other women within this gender group.
Dear, I think after divorce, when you look at lone parent families, I think about 80–90% are actually headed by women. So this issue then carries on, doesn't it?
Yes, I agree. And I think that divorced women is really, and also it depends on the age of divorce, because late life divorce doesn't have the same effect as early life divorce. And I think that this is something that we have to look very much both in research and policy, and see how we help different women from different industries, different marital status, and different race, of course.
So, Julia, we've touched on a couple of key risk groups, widows, divorced women. Are there other groups that you wanted to bring focus on in particular?
Yes, I mean, there's been some very useful research done by the UK's International Longevity Centre, in fact, with Phoenix. And in a previous session, I think Gail Isaac referred to this, which was a report produced, I think, just back in March, in relation to retirement income prospects for the Generation X women. So this is people born between 1965 and 1980. So people retiring in the next 10, 20, 25 years. And it's called Slipping Between the Cracks. And it's very insightful in terms of looking at particular, rather than looking in sort of swathes, looking individually at particular cohorts. And I think it's really important to unpick it like this, that 1 in 6 of Generation X women have no pension at all. They're often the most worried psychologically about financial issues for later life. The care burden, we've talked about that, falling on these women. Often they're in lower income, part-time, or they've taken career breaks, and perhaps because they're earning less, they will have not been entitled to the auto enrollment. So I think there are shifts that can be made to actually address particular cohorts who are going to be more significantly impacted, by the pension gap position. So yes, I think we need to look at this carefully, by group. I mean, I've been particularly interested with my work on the older worker, and how organisations can look at the value that the older worker brings to the organization. We're facing huge age discrimination in relation to the employment of older workers, which has been more difficult by the pandemic. They take much longer to find new work, and it's hugely difficult. But looking at the value of an age integrated, intergenerationally integrated team, it has huge dividends for an organization, and many studies have shown that. So I think, looking at particular groups of a population is really important when we're addressing some of the practical and policy changes that we can be making.
So as well as policy changes, Ira, how much of this is to do with fintech and digitization? And what examples have you seen that could help us in the UK as well?
Yeah, so I'm a big believer in late life employment through digitalization. And I think that organizations, corporates have to do everything in order to make sure that all their digital products are really accessible beyond what is really requested or required by the compliance rules, which are very, very low. So I think that late life employment is so important, especially for women, because women will have to find new ways to provide for themselves when they are older. And one of the major ways to be employed or find ways to earn money in later life is your skills. And even if you know a language, or you can teach someone else to play chess, or other things, or cooking, or everything that you think that can be really valuable for society. I'm really against the 100% volunteering approach of women when they are older, because they really give their accumulated skills, accumulated advantages that they have accumulated over time across their lives. So now they are volunteering. So I think that at least 1/3 of women's time has to be do everything so they can really earn money. And I think that the gig economy, we have to find new Fiverr, or somebody has to build a new Fiverr for older adults, because there's a lot of skills here that are really taken away without anyone using it. So I think that the fintech, and we see also there's a gender gap in fintech, because men are most likely to use financial technology than women. But I think that women have really to do everything, take courses, and there's a lot of free education for financial technology, digital literacy, really do everything to make sure that they will find the right way for even a small amount of income when they're older. So for me, skills is one of the major attributes for longevity financing.
And Julie,
through fintech, yeah.
I think this fits into kind of visibility of flexible working policies as well. So I know Ira's touched on a lot of different skills. So what are your views on like how we increase the flexible working policies to allow women to kind of stay in the workforce longer, even if it's at a very, very reduced time requirement?
So I think that organizations, for example, like Mercer, and I know that you're doing it with in your project around the world, is phased retirement. Yeah. But phased retirement is not only gradually leaving the labor market, it's also educating older people and helping them to be prepared for retirement. And being prepared for life when they're retirees is also giving them the right tools to be able to be part of society, meaning finding new ways to increase their income by using financial technology, by using any digitalization. And I think that the corporates, or the big corporates especially, have to help also the truck driver and other people from the blue collar, so they will be able to do everything they can do in order to increase their economic standing in late life.
Thank you. I'm going to have to stop there. We're just going to hit 3:50. That was a flying tour of the gender pension gap. There's so much insight there. It's incredible. And definitely it's a very real problem. It's not going to solve itself. And there's a lot for all of us to do as women in the industry. So Angela, I'm going to hand over to you to close off.
Thanks so much, Azka. And look, thank you to our panel. I don't know about the rest of our audience, but I feel so privileged to just listen to so much insight and thought behind this huge challenge. And I feel buoyed by the fact that there are so many excellent brains who are working on this. But look, thank you to our audience for watching. Thank you for being so interactive and posting so many thoughts and comments into the chat. Great to hear from you. Huge thank you to our panel, in particular to Azka for the huge amount of preparation that was put in beforehand to deliver you guys a really great session. Please stick around. We've got lots more discussions running this afternoon, in particular a couple of different investor panels if you're interested in looking at this concept of growing wealth to support retirement. So please do join us for those. But in the meantime, I will let you go. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.